This is the second lesson looking at classification. In the first lesson, I gave you a brief overview of what classification is, some examples of where we see it in society, and I also talked about dichotomous keys, how you can interpret them, and how you can make one yourself. In this lesson, I'm going to focus more on how we classify living things specifically. So when we classify living things, we use the system called the Linnaean classification system. And this was developed in the 1700s by a Swedish scientist called Carl Linnaeus. And his system that he initially developed looks a bit different to the one that we have today, but nonetheless, the overall structure is still the same. The system divides all the living things on Earth into 7 levels of classification, from having the broadest things in common to having the most specific things in common. And so let's go through all 7 steps. We start off with the kingdom, and on Earth, every living thing is divided into 5 groups, 5 kingdoms. We have the animal kingdom, which we are a part of, the plant kingdom, fungi, protist, and monera. Protist and monera, members of those kingdoms are generally microscopic, and so therefore we need a microscope to see those. We will focus mainly on the animal kingdom, and we might touch on parts of the plant kingdom as well. But getting more specific than the kingdom is what phylum the organism belongs to. So we have, for example, mollusks, which are soft-bodied organisms that have a hard shell. We have arthropods, which are your insects, poriferans, which are sea sponges, and chordates, which is what we are a part of. And then getting more specific, we have classes within each phyla. We have reptiles, amphibians, and mammals, and we of course are a part of the mammal class. And so now we're starting to get into some groups that you might recognize. You've probably seen mammals, amphibians, and reptiles before. Getting more specific, we go into the order that the organism is in. And we have monotremes, rodents, primates, marsupials. These are all examples of orders. And this website here is a great little website that covers all of the orders within the mammal class. Getting more specific again, we can look at the family of the organism, and there are 16 families just within the primates order. And so this includes lemurs, monkeys, gibbons, and we are part of the great ape family, which is called Hominidae. Then we look at the genus, and our genus is called Homo, and we are actually the last surviving members of the Homo genus. And these are highly developed and intelligent apes. So we're the last surviving members of that genus. And then our species is called sapiens. So this is 7 levels of classification from the kingdom, which has the broadest things in common. I mean, we are part of the animal kingdom, but so are jellyfish, so are birds. There's so much variety within that animal kingdom. And as we move down these levels, we get more and more specific until we reach the species. And members of the same species have a lot of things in common. So I'm going to show you an example of how we can use the Linnaean classification system with a specific animal. And in this case, I'm going to do it with the grizzly bear. So we start off with the kingdom that the grizzly bear belongs to, which is the animal or Animalia kingdom. And all of the animals on Earth belong to this kingdom. So it's a huge, wide range of animals. We've got sea stars, snakes, squirrels, foxes, pandas, black bears, and grizzly bears. So all of the animals you can think of. Also, jellyfish, birds, lizards, insects, they all belong to this huge group of living things called the animal kingdom. Then we get more specific and we look at what phylum the grizzly bear belongs to. And it belongs to the chordate or chordata phylum. And these are animals that have a spinal cord that runs down their back. And we can see that that automatically eliminates the sea star because it does not have a spinal cord. But we are left with these organisms, and it's quite a large phylum. Then we get more specific and we look at what class the grizzly bear belongs to. And it belongs to the mammal or Mammalia class. And these are animals that have fur, they have sweat glands, they produce milk for their young, and their hearts have 4 chambers. And there's a few other criteria that animals have to have in order to be classed as mammals. But that eliminates the snake. And then we get more specific again, and we look at what order the bear belongs to, the grizzly bear belongs to. And it belongs to the carnivora order. And carnivores not only eat meat, but they can also be omnivores, which means they eat plants and meat. And the direct translation from Latin to English for carnivore is to devour flesh. So that gives you a bit of a clue as to what the criteria is to be classed as a carnivore. But that eliminates the squirrel. Then we look at the family that the grizzly bear belongs to, and it belongs to the Ursidae family, which is the bear family. So that gets rid of the fox. That's in a separate family. And then we look at the genus, and as you can see, we're getting really specific here because there's only a couple of different species within that particular genus of bear. And the genus that the grizzly bear belongs to is Ursus, and the black bear also is in the same genus. So these two would have very similar DNA, but then we can get more specific again and look at the actual species. And the species for the grizzly bear is Ursus arctos. So members of the same species can mate and reproduce, and they can produce live young. So that's really the criteria for being in the same species. You can get members of different species breeding and producing offspring, but they are usually infertile. For it to be classed as a species, you have to have 2 members of that species breeding together and producing fertile offspring that can then go on to have more offspring. But in this example, we've gone from the kingdom that the grizzly bear belongs to all the way down to the actual species that it belongs to. When we're naming living things, we use Latin as the universal language. And when you translate the Latin names for things into English, you'll find that it describes it really, really well. The first name has a capital letter and is the genus to which the animal belongs. And the second name in the scientific name is the species that they belong to. So in the previous example with the grizzly bear, its scientific name was Ursus arctos. Ursus is the genus that the grizzly bear belongs to, and arctos was the name of the species. So its full scientific name was Ursus arctos, genus, species. When we look at, in the bottom left here, Homo sapiens, that's our scientific name as humans. Homo is the genus that we belong to, and sapiens is the name of our species. Then we have lions, Panthera leo. We have bottlenose dolphins, Perseops truncatus. And so you can see that with these names, because they're typed, they're in italics. If we were handwriting these, we would underline them. And given that there are 2 names in scientific names, this is known as binomial nomenclature, which is basically a 2-name system. Earlier, I mentioned that there were 5 kingdoms that all the living things on Earth belong to. And now we're going to look at some characteristics of each of those kingdoms. So starting with the top, we have the animal kingdom, which we belong to. And these get their energy by feeding off other things. And because they are made up of many cells, we say that animals are multicellular organisms. Then we have plants. And plants get their food through a process called photosynthesis. Basically, they make their own food using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to produce a sugar called glucose. And plants are also multicellular organisms. And then we have fungi. And fungi feed mostly on dead things, and they can actually grow on other living things as well. And these are your things like molds, toadstools, mushrooms, and yeast. They love to grow on things and absorb things. And we have protists, and protists can be plant-like or animal-like, but they are single-celled organisms. We say that they're unicellular organisms. And although we have a lot of variation in the animal kingdom, I mean, the animal kingdom consists of pelicans, humans, frogs, spiders, jellyfish. There's a huge range of different things in there. The protist kingdom actually has the widest variety of organisms because we've got things that behave like plants, but also things that behave like animals. So it's a very big, vast kingdom that often we don't see because they're microscopic. And we have Monera as well. And these are also unicellular. And basically, this consists of bacteria and types of bacteria. Let's now go through a quick summary of everything that we've learnt from this lesson. The Linnaean classification system is used to classify living things into 7 levels of organization. Starting with the kingdom has the broadest and widest variety of different things within it. So for example, we're part of the animal kingdom, but so are jellyfish, birds, apes, lions, reptiles. We're all part of the animal kingdom. So it's the widest variety of different organisms. And then getting more specific, we have the phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then finally the species. And members of the same species are very similar and they share the most amount of DNA. We give organisms their scientific name based on their genus and their species. So with the grizzly bear, its scientific name is Ursus arctos because its genus is Ursus and its species is Arctos. There are 5 kingdoms. Animals and plants are multicellular, so they're made up of multiple cells, and they differ based on how they obtain their food. Animals consume their food, while plants can make their own food using a process called photosynthesis. Fungi can be multicellular or unicellular. Protists and Monera are unicellular. Protists have a nucleus that contains the DNA, and Monera do not. What I tend to do now with my students is get them to come up with some sort of creative system of memorizing those 7 levels of classification in that order. And generally speaking, if you can remember the first letter of each of those levels in order, then that'll certainly help your memory in a test situation. So you can come up with a creative phrase, like King Philip can only find green snakes. As long as you remember that phrase, which uses each of those letters in order, then that'll certainly help your memory in a test situation. So what I want you to do now is come up with your own creative mnemonic to try and remember those 7 levels in order.